It looks like I need to do a comprehensive video on the shooting of Oswald by Jack Ruby, because I just saw something one of the Shills and Idiots said about it, so oh, there's a need for this, so here it is. Now I'm going to start here with this is a diagram provided in the Warren Commission report showing the official story. That is that Jack Ruby, you see a dotted line on the right. This says Ruby's route, claiming that Jack Ruby entered the basement through the Main Street ramp to the parking garage there. And this diagram also shows Oswald's route from the jail elevator through the jail out into the garage corridor there, and showing where he was shot. And this from the Warren Commission report. Although the sum of this evidence tends to support Ruby's claim that he entered by the Main Street ramp, there is other evidence not fully consistent with Ruby's story. Patrolman Vaughn stated that he checked the credentials of all unknown persons seeking to enter the basement, and his testimony was supported by several persons. Vaughn denied that the emergence of Lieutenant Pierce's car from the building distracted him long enough to allow Ruby to enter the ramp unnoticed. Neither he nor any of the three officers in Lieutenant Pierce's car saw Ruby enter. So there's a police officer who's guarding this entrance, says Ruby didn't come in that way, and nobody else saw Ruby come in that way. Despite Vaughn's denial, the Commission has found no credible evidence to support any other entry route. Two Dallas detectives believe they observed three men pushing a WBAP-TV camera into the basement minutes before the shooting, while only two were with the camera after Oswald had been shot. However, films taken in the basement show the WBAP-TV camera being pushed past the detectives by only two men. The suspicion of the detectives is probably explained by testimony that a third WBAP-TV employee ran to help steady the incoming camera as it entered the basement, probably just before the camera became visible on the films. Moreover, since the camera entered the basement close to 4 minutes before the shooting, it is virtually impossible that Ruby could have been in the basement at that time. I'm going to get to the element of time later on in the video, so I'm going to ignore that for now. But here, the Warren Commission dismisses this idea without even saying what it is, and the idea is that Ruby snuck in with the WBAP-TV camera. They never explicitly say that's what's suspected, and they do not name the two Dallas detectives. And here they give an explanation for why we don't see the WBAP-TV employee run to help steady the incoming camera. That's because it happened just before we could see the camera in the film, they say. Well, that very same explanation can work for a third man pushing the camera. That is, the third man could have been pushing the camera before we see the camera on the film, and he could have left the camera by the time we see it. So even though they say there's no credible evidence to support any other entry route, here they're providing the credible evidence. It's just as credible as their explanation, because their explanation for why we don't see this supposed other employee could be the same explanation for why we don't see three people pushing the camera. So obviously they're trying to sell us a particular story. The story they want to sell us is that Ruby came in the Main Street ramp and did not come in with the TV camera. And what that means, of course, is that Ruby came in with the TV camera. And they don't want us to know that because it shows conspiracy. It shows that Ruby had help getting into the basement. He didn't just stroll down the Main Street ramp and the cops all happened to miss seeing him there. He was helped in with that TV camera. The two detectives not named in the Warren Commission report are Cutshaw and Lowry, and their story about the camera comes from FBI interviews done with them on the day that Oswald was shot. This is the Warren Commission copy of the FBI interview with Cutshaw. Of course, it's almost impossible to read, so I have applied some filters to it so I can read it more easily. Starting where the red asterisk is, Cutshaw related that about 3 minutes before Oswald had been brought out of the jail office, that a television camera had been rolled through the double doors leading into the corridor from the basement lobby. This camera was rolled past Cutshaw, and he recalls that 3 men with their heads down were pushing it. The camera was rolled on down the corridor past detectives Roy Lee Lowry, and necessarily it passed several other officers who were stationed between Lowry and Cutshaw. Cutshaw stated that immediately after the shooting, he noticed that this camera was being rolled back up the ramp toward the basement lobby area, and only 2 men were pushing the camera. He stated he questioned them as to the whereabouts of the 3rd man, and they stated there had only been 2 men all along. Cutshaw stated that he obtained the identities of these cameramen and turned this information over to the Homicide and Robbery Bureau. He recalled the name of one of the men as John Alexander, employed by Channel 5, Fort Worth, Texas. The other individual's name he cannot recall, but stated he also worked for Channel 5. Cutshaw stated that the cameramen, at the time of the first passing him, had to pass several other officers in the basement lobby as well as 2 officers stationed outside the double doors leading to the corridor area. And this is the FBI report of the Lowry interview. And I'll read from here. Lowry stated that he recalled the Channel 5 television camera was rolled down the corridor to the ramp area just prior to the arrival of Oswald in the area. He stated that he, too, was under the impression that there were 3 men pushing this camera, and all had their heads down. He stated as it passed him at the entrance of the corridor at the ramp, it was pushed across the ramp drive down to the ramp going to the basement parking area and stopped several feet behind the line of newsmen and reporters. He stated this camera was never put into operation. The cable was never connected, and the cap was never taken off. The lens cap was never taken off. Lowry stated that following the shooting, the actions of the 2 cameramen who pushed the camera from the area was brought to the attention of Lieutenant B.E. Swain, Jr., and they were taken to the Homicide and Robbery Bureau for questioning. Lowry advised he was of the opinion Jack Leon Ruby probably entered pertinent area under the pretext of being with the above-mentioned Channel 5 television newsmen. So there it is. This is what the Warren Report never states explicitly. That is, that one of the Dallas police detectives suspected that Jack Ruby got into the basement by pretending to be part of a camera crew. For some reason, the Warren Report never even mentions that. And even though the Warren Report never said so, even Liar Myers knows this happened. Dale Myers, on his webpage thing here, says Cantor, he means Seth Cantor, reports that indeed NBC TV footage taken after the shooting shows Lowry telling a police lieutenant that the man who shot Oswald came into the garage with a TV camera. And this footage of Lowry telling the lieutenant that Ruby came in with the camera can be found on YouTube.
When I those and they coming back up here to get to them. Well, McGee's got them over there. Came out of here, that camera because I helped hold that camera as he started off. They went into the crowd over there. The camera never was hooked up.
And that's why the Warren Commission had to deal with this. They had to debunk what Lowry said. And he said it on TV. I mean, it's not just an FBI report that they could bury. They had to deal with this. And they chose to deal with it by not saying explicitly what it is they're dealing with exactly. But one of the ways they choose to deal with it is to say that the films, and they mean the video, there was one video tape being taken here. It's not more than one film. But it says the films taken in the basement show the WBAP TV camera being pushed past the detectives by only 2 men. And, of course, the time element there, which I'll get to later. And this is that video that they're calling the films. And here is where we can first see the camera. Of course, I'm running it in slow motion, and I have it cropped. And here we can see Lowry standing there, and he's looking at the camera, and he's looking at the camera before we can see how many people are pushing it. So it could very well be that there were 3 people pushing that camera when he was first looking at it. And Cutshaw, the other detective who saw the 3 people pushing it, is even further down the corridor there, and we can't see him in this video at all. So both Cutshaw and Lowry could have seen 3 people pushing that camera before we can even see the camera in the video. So that's not a reason to dismiss Cutshaw and Lowry. Now, running this part of the video, we can see indeed that there are 2 people pushing the camera. One is very obvious, the one I've circled in red, and he's obviously part of the camera crew, I think. He's the guy that's said to be wearing a green shirt, even though we don't have color. But you can see in this frame of the video that there's another person. You can see his hand gripping one of the tripod legs there. Though you can't see him very well. It's as if he's trying not to be seen, trying not to be noticed so much. And here I'm running it in the loop. You can see that guy whose hand that is behind the camera tripod. He's ducking down as the camera comes into the corridor. And this is that man's head earlier in the video. And then he raises his hand as if he's waving to somebody. Though you might say he's reaching up to the lens there because he sees it wobbling and he's going to stabilize the lens. But I think he's waving to somebody. And if you look at his head there, you can't identify him, but he certainly has a head similar to Ruby's in the amount of hair and where the hair is. It looks a lot like Ruby. And I want to show this part of the video in full frame too. This is where I'm starting here, and I've got the camera circled there. And when the guy waves here, where is he? There he is waving. It looks like a guy on the right is waving back at him, the guy wearing the hat on the right. But I don't know about that. But what I really wanted to show here is how these people move in front of the camera taking the video here. So that I think they're doing this intentionally. Maybe the guy holding the microphone isn't, but these other 2 people, this guy coming into the scene from the left, I think he and the guy that came before him are intentionally moving in front of this camera so that we don't see Jack Ruby duck down pushing that camera in. And once the camera moves past, they seem to lose their sense of purpose and they just kind of stroll off slowly. Of course, I have it in slow motion here. But originally in the film, they were moving as if they had a purpose. They were moving more quickly. And their purpose, I think, was to get in front of the camera to obscure our view of Ruby. Also notice here that Detective Lowry, the guy who thought that Ruby snuck in with the camera, is still staring at that camera, presumably still staring at Ruby, even after it has gone past him. And coincidentally, these 2 guys that I say are walking intentionally in front of the camera so we don't see who's pushing it, these 2 guys happen to be the same 2 guys that Detective Lowry talks to later, one of whom at least we are told is a police lieutenant. So it looks to me as if probably these police officers, probably they're both police officers, higher-ups, are intentionally helping Ruby to get into the basement by blocking the videotaping camera's view of that camera being pushed into the basement. I've always found this video hard to relate to the diagrams of the space, so I've made additions to the Warren Commission diagram here. The green arrow there is the camera that Ruby apparently is sneaking in with. And I put the blue X on that green camera's line where I think is approximately where we can first see the camera in the video. And I've noted with a C the location of Cutshaw, according to his testimony, and the location of Lowry, according to his testimony and according to the photography. And on the right there, I have video camera labeled, which is where I estimate the camera was, which takes the video that we see, which I understand was a closed-circuit TV thing that was being recorded. I'll probably get to that later in the video. Yes, I will get to that later in the video because it has to do with the time element, which I'm going to get to. But anyway, I thought this diagram might be helpful to anybody who's seriously interested, if there are such people out there. And here, I just want to refer to a little of Lowry's Warren Commission testimony, just to illustrate something. Here, Mr. Hubert, representing the Warren Commission, shows Lowry that FBI report that I read from, and he asks Lowry if there's anything he wants to comment about, make any corrections. He makes a correction about something there, and then he reads a little bit from it. But this is the same thing I read, wherein Lowry said he suspected that Ruby got into the basement by pretending to be part of the camera crew, and it doesn't come up in the questioning. Mr. Hubert doesn't ask him about that. It's never mentioned. Ruby is talked about here. A third camera guy is talked about here. But it's never explicitly stated that the suspicion is that Ruby was that third cameraman or one of the cameramen that he snuck in with the camera. So I view this as sleight of hand by the Warren Commission. They're dealing with this matter because they have to deal with it, but they're not making it explicit what they're talking about because they don't want any of the idiots, the American idiots who might read this, to know what they're talking about. They don't want you to realize that Lowry suspected that Ruby snuck into the basement with the TV camera. And that's never stated. They're just talking about some third cameraman. And this is just one of many instances in the investigation where the investigation is incomprehensible unless you're already an expert on the evidence. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it was intentionally done that way. You have to be an expert to understand what they're talking about. And how do you become an expert without spending years of your life studying the evidence? And so that's how they're able to get away with it. They can do an investigation in such a way that nobody can understand what they're talking about. When Cutshaw was questioned by the Warren Commission's attorney Griffin, Ruby was mentioned as possibly being one of these people with the camera, but Griffin spends 8 pages of testimony here trying to get Cutshaw to say that he came up with the story because he was trying to protect Blackie Harrison from being disciplined for not throwing Jack Ruby out of the basement, which is just utterly ridiculous, I think, not based on any evidence at all, but I think it shows the desperation on the part of the Warren Commission here to want to prove that Ruby was not with the TV camera. And I think that means, of course, that Ruby was with the TV camera. And now we're going to wade into the murky waters of who these cameramen were. This is the FBI report of an interview with Cutshaw, as I referred to earlier. And in this report, Cutshaw identifies one of the men as being a John Alexander. And he says the same thing in his Warren Commission testimony. So apparently one of these cameramen, when asked, gave his name as John Alexander. And as I read earlier in the FBI report of the interview with Lowry, it says that these cameramen were taken to the Homicide and Robbery Bureau for questioning. So according to this FBI report, apparently they are saying that Lowry said this. However, Lowry, when he was presented with this document in his Warren Commission testimony, said that the facts are that the cameramen were not taken to Homicide and Robbery Bureau. So Lowry, in his Warren Commission testimony, his sworn testimony, and the FBI report doesn't actually quote him, he's saying that the FBI is misrepresenting what he said. Of course, he's more polite about it than I am, but it looks like the FBI just made up this shit about taking the cameramen to Homicide and Robbery Bureau for questioning, so it would look like this was thoroughly investigated. But according to Lowry in his Warren Commission testimony, that did not happen. And he continues, I accompanied those men up to the third floor where they were allowed to set up their long-range camera, and I stayed with these people for approximately an hour to an hour until I contacted Lieutenant Baker in the Homicide Division and told him the reason that I was with these people. And he advised me to take their names and addresses, business phone, and home phone number, and that it wouldn't be necessary to stay with them any longer. I took this information and turned it in to Lieutenant Baker and released the cameramen. So Lowry is the one who would be the expert on who these cameramen were. That is, he's the police officer who would know better than anyone else who these cameramen were. And of course, he's not asked about who they were. And Lieutenant Baker, although he was interviewed by the Warren Commission, was not asked about who these cameramen were. So, once again, as often happens, the authorities know who they should go to get the information, and they don't attempt to get the information from that person. Now, interestingly, the FBI talked with Sergeant Gerald Hill about these cameramen, and he would be a good man to talk to because before he had become a police officer, Sergeant Hill had worked for the very same television station, so he would know many of these people. He also knew Jack Ruby very well, coincidentally, as I mentioned in my Big Hill video. But anyway, about this matter, in this report, it says, Hill stated that he was not present at the shooting by Ruby of Lee Harvey Oswald as he was in San Antonio, Texas, attending the Texas Municipal Police Officers Convention. He stated that upon returning to Dallas at about 6:30 p.m. on November 24, 1963, he began inquiring among members of his department and ascertained that two detectives, R.L. Lowry and W.J. Cutshaw, both of the Juvenile Department, were present at the time of the shooting of Oswald by Ruby. He stated that they related that just before the shooting, a television camera for a Channel 5 was tipped over while being brought to the scene where Oswald was shot. He stated that Lowry and Cutshaw stated that they recalled three men pushing the camera through a doorway leading into the basement area through which Oswald was to be escorted. He stated that at approximately the same time Ruby dashed from the front and to the left of Oswald and fired the fatal shot. He stated that Detectives Lowry and Cutshaw recalled glancing in the direction of the camera for a Channel 5 and noted that there were only two individuals with the camera at that time. He stated that they were of the opinion that possibly Ruby was one of the individuals who had accompanied the camera into the area and had made his move from this position. He said that he contacted a man by the name of Timon, first name unknown, the sound engineer for the Channel 5 camera, who told him that the other individual assigned to the camera with him was one John Alexander, and that he, Timon, recalled that no other individual assisting them in placing the camera in the location before the fatal shot. Timon said it was very possible that someone else was present and immediately behind them. He stated that he had not had an opportunity to speak with Alexander. So what I take from this is that we have now another name, Timon. So it is Timon and Alexander who were with the camera, according to the official storytellers. And John Alexander, I think we should note, is probably a real person, because Jerry Hill is familiar with the personnel at WBAP, having worked there himself. And if we are to trust Jerry Hill, which is probably not advisable, but in this area, he's probably telling the truth. John Alexander probably is a real person he just didn't talk to. And Timon probably is a real person. So it seems to be pretty sure that one of these cameramen gave his name as John Alexander, and that the other cameraman was this Timon person. But the FBI did follow up on this lead by interviewing a David A. Timmons, presumably his actual name. David A. Timmons, 900 Marigold Street, advised that he is producer-director for WBAP-TV, Channel 5, Fort Worth, and has worked for this station for the past 15 years. So Gerald Hill would have known Timmons from the time that he had worked there, because he had worked there in that time period when Timmons was there. So he would know Timmons, and if Timmons knows Alexander and tells Jerry Hill that Alexander was with the camera, then Alexander must be a real person who probably was with the camera, one would think. But Mr. Timmons advised that he and John H. Tankersley, that's a new name, also of WBAP-TV, proceeded to Dallas, Texas at about 4 a.m. on November 23rd, 1963, and that he was floor director for camera number 1 with WBAP-TV for National Broadcasting Company. Timmons said that he and Tankersley had their camera on the 3rd floor of the Dallas City Hall during Saturday, November 23rd, 1963, until Sunday a.m., November 24, 1963, at which time it was learned that an armored car was being backed into the basement of the City Hall. Timmons said that he and Tankersley were directed to take their camera to the basement of the City Hall, as Lee Harvey Oswald would be leaving from that area. He does not say who directed them to do so, but they were directed. Timmons said that he and Tankersley took the camera, which was on a tripod and was top-heavy due to the fact that the camera had been set high on the tripod in order to take pictures over the crowd. He said that after they left the 3rd floor by elevator to the basement, and upon entering the basement door, the camera started to wobble. Timmons said that he was helping push the camera from the back, and when the camera began to wobble, that James Turner, also an employee of WBAP-TV, and also a camera employee for WBAP-TV, came over and helped him and Tankersley steady their camera and get it through the door. So there's the explanation that the Warren Commission wants. This apparently is the testimony they're referring to, that another employee came to help steady the camera, and that explains the 3rd camera person. Timmons said that he did not see Ruby at any time in the basement of the City Hall, and did not see the action that took place concerning the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, because he, Timmons, at that particular time was on the right side of the camera holding the mic connections, and the action was on the left side of the camera. Timmons stated that he does not have any information or knowledge as to how Jack Ruby may have gotten to the basement of the City Hall. So the important thing to take from this document is that we have this new name, John H. Tankersley, and apparently he's being substituted for John Alexander. So Alexander has become Tankersley somehow. So, of course, the FBI did its due diligence and talked to Tankersley and produced this cookie-cutter report, which says exactly the same thing that the Timmons report says, so I won't bother reading it. So we've got this new guy, Tankersley, who claims, apparently, according to the FBI, if he even exists, according to the FBI, he claims, or he's now the guy who had been John Alexander. And I'll note here again that this is the camera that was never hooked up. The lens cap was never taken off, and it was not used. It was not used to record the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. And yet we have this information from the Dallas Municipal Archives, or City of Dallas Archives. At the time that I was researching this is where the information was. I think a lot of this, or all of this information perhaps, has been transferred to the Portal to Texas History now. I'm not sure about that. But when I was researching this a few years ago, this is where I got it. And this is information referring to a film they have in their archives, a film by John Tankersley. So I guess he is a real person. But it's a film, 56 seconds, containing the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby. So apparently there exists a film by John Tankersley of the Oswald shooting by Jack Ruby, even though the official story is trying to tell us that Tankersley was with this camera that didn't take any film during the shooting of Oswald. So I think it's pretty clear that there was a John Alexander, or someone saying his name was John Alexander, with the camera. It was not Tankersley. Tankersley was with some other camera that really was used there. And they're trying to hide John Alexander from us for some reason that I can only speculate on. But obviously there's something going on here, something funny going on, and they're obscuring everything. And they're pretending that they investigated these camera people, and apparently they didn't really do so, because a real investigator would have noticed that John Alexander has become John Tankersley. And apparently they didn't. And we don't know anything about John Alexander. He was never interviewed by any, or we have no record of an interview with John Alexander. And they substituted Tankersley for Alexander. I mean, come on now. So I think that the best explanation for all this crap is that was Jack Ruby with the camera. And that's how he was sneaked into the basement, and that he did have help, and it was part of a conspiracy, and the Dallas police and WBAP TV personnel were utilized in this conspiracy. And now for the complex part of this, the time element. In the Warren Report, as I read earlier, it says, moreover, since the camera entered the basement close to 4 minutes before the shooting, it is virtually impossible that Ruby could have been in the basement at that time. And this conclusion is borne out by the evidence. Jack Ruby had randomly received a request for money from Little Lynn, and had randomly gone to the Western Union in order to send her some money. And the Western Union apparently every morning sets their clock by an atomic clock or something. I forget exactly what it was, but there's some very accurate clock that they set it by every morning. And the latest timestamp on Ruby's materials from Western Union is 11:17 a.m. That's pretty airtight. So that means that Jack Ruby could not have left the Western Union office before 11:17 a.m. And according to the Dallas police, Oswald was shot at 11:20 a.m. So that means that Ruby had no more than 3 minutes to get from the Western Union office to the position at which he shot Oswald. So if the Warren Commission is right, that this camera that we see in the video was there 4 minutes before Oswald had shot, it would seem to be impossible that Ruby could be with that camera, because he hasn't even got his last receipt from Western Union yet. That's pretty good. That's so good, it makes me think it might have been planned. So how does the Warren Commission know that the camera had entered the basement close to 4 minutes before the shooting? Well, the video that shows the camera being pushed through the basement. And I don't think the Warren Commission ever explained how they knew this, but that video was taken from a closed-circuit channel, which the FBI talks about here in this document. Other documents reveal that the FBI obtained a copy of this videotape and that they took possession of it as part of the evidence. And this was a closed-circuit thing. It wasn't a film. Film was expensive, and you'd just take a few seconds of film or a minute or two of film when something's happening. But this was running before Oswald had been taken out, and the TV station was just running this open or this closed-circuit channel, and they were recording it back at their studio. So the Warren Commission had a continuous videotape of the action leading up to the shooting of Oswald, and that could be easily determined. You could just put a stopwatch on the tape and see how long before the shooting the camera had been there. I haven't done that. I don't know if the entire video is available unedited or not to me, but it certainly was to the FBI and the Warren Commission. So they're probably right about this. It was probably close to 4 minutes before the shooting. And so that would seem to be impossible that Ruby could be with the camera. That is, if Oswald had really been shot at 11:20. So was Oswald really shot at 11:20? This is an FBI document with 3 different dates on it, but apparently it was originally created on the day Oswald was shot. And it says, at about 11:20 a.m., Special Agents Ivan D. Lee and Robert M. Barrett were contacting Eddie Barker, director of KRLD TV and Radio News Department. In Barker's office was a TV monitor, and Barker advised it was set on a closed-circuit channel and that it would depict in a few minutes the removal of Lee Harvey Oswald from the City Hall Jail to the Dallas County Jail. The agents first observed numerous police officers and members of the press in an area in the basement of the City Hall near a door which connects the City Hall jail office and the garage area in the basement. At about 11:24 a.m., agents observed Captain Will Fritz come out of the hall which leads to the city jail office, and he was preceding the officers and the men who were bringing Oswald from the jail to the armored truck. This armored truck was parked on the south side of the City Hall, which is the exit from the City Hall garage area, and which was up a ramp from the garage area. About 10 to 15 feet in front of Fritz, agents had observed Lieutenant Richard E. Swain preceded the group of officers which were leading Oswald. Oswald had a police officer holding on to each arm, and numerous police officers were behind him. There was no officer in that 5 to 6 feet area between Fritz and Oswald. At about 11:25 a.m., the agents observed a man wearing a dark hat and suit jump into the clearing with a revolver in his right hand, and he moved directly toward Oswald. A shot was heard, and the TV announcer immediately screamed, "Oswald has been shot." So according to these FBI agents who were watching live the closed-circuit broadcast, or the closed-circuit transmission, in Eddie Barker's office, Oswald was shot at about 11:25 a.m., which is 5 minutes later than the official time, which gives Jack Ruby plenty of time to get from the Western Union office to that camera to sneak into the basement to shoot Oswald. So the FBI's own agents here put the time of the shooting at 11:25, not the official story time of 11:20. And these times are reflected in the official FBI report on Oswald's shooting. Now, they don't have the 11:25 time here. They just have 11:24, but that is the time the police escort reached the ramp area, according to the report They don't put the shooting time there for some reason. But obviously this 11:24 time is a reflection of this FBI report wherein the agents reported the time of the shooting at 11:25. And more than 6 months later here, the FBI is trying to fudge this time. And why would they bother 6 months later unless they knew that Jack Ruby came in with a TV camera and that they're trying to disprove that possibility? But anyway, in June of 1964, this FBI report was made. It says records of Southwestern Bell Telephone Company, Dallas, Texas, show that a telephone call was placed from a number assigned to the FBI office Dallas via collect dialing to Executive 3-7100, Washington, D.C. at 11:22 a.m., November 24th, 1963. The above information can be made public only through the issuance of a subpoena, blah, blah, blah. The point of this is to say that their agents called them at 11:22 a.m. to say that Oswald had been shot, thus proving that Oswald had been shot before 11:22 a.m. And as it turns out, the agents estimated they called about 30 seconds after he'd been shot. So this would make it around 11:21 a.m., the time of the shooting. However, Southwestern Bell Telephone doesn't tell us what the content of the telephone call was. It could be the agents also called when they got to Eddie Barker's office before Oswald had been shot. We don't know that. But the FBI wants us to assume that this means that Oswald was shot before 11:22 a.m. And 2 days later, the FBI tries again to put an ink blot on this time. Eddie Barker, director of KRLD TV and Radio News Department, advised he had had the station engineers check a videotape in possession of the station, which tape depicts the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby on November 24th, 1963, in the basement of the Dallas City Hall, in an effort to determine the exact time of the shooting, without success. Baker explained that the engineers had told him that they had checked the tape every way known to them and had checked the station records in an effort to establish the time, but had been unable to do so with any degree of accuracy. So here the FBI is essentially saying that the KRLD can't say what time Oswald was shot. And unless you're an expert on the evidence, you have no idea what this document means, why it's here. I mean, yeah, it says they're trying to determine the exact time of the shooting, but why would that matter 6 months later? It's because there's this problem with two Dallas police detectives, Lowry and Cutshaw, who said Jack Ruby snuck into the basement with a TV camera. And they're still trying to prove in June 1964 that he couldn't have done that. But they're not telling us that that's what they're doing. It's as if they just wanted to find out randomly 6 months later what time Oswald was shot. And they do it this way because they don't want you to know what they're covering up. And now going to WFAA's coverage of Oswald's shooting. Note the time clock on the videotape there says 11:25.
Bob Walker, WFAA-TV, Dallas, Texas, interrupting. There's been a shooting at Dallas Police Station as Oswald was being transferred. For details, Bill Lord, ABC at City Hall. Bill.
Just 1 minute ago, they were bringing Oswald out.
Now note that Bill Lord just said 1 minute ago they were bringing Oswald out. 1 minute ago, according to the time clock, would have been 11:24. And that matches perfectly with what those two FBI agents said, who are watching the closed-circuit feed in Eddie Barker's office. They said Oswald was being brought out at 10:20 or at 11:24.
He had apparently changed clothes. He was just going out the door, heading towards the armored car, and there was a bang. We believe it was a shot. And apparently, what has happened to it, we do not know at the present time. Policemen rushed to the scene, attempting to ascertain what had happened. The photographers were taking pictures. Is there someone down on the floor over there? Is there someone injured down on the floor? Apparently Oswald is the word we get, but this is unconfirmed because no one can really see.
So this timing of Oswald being shot matches up with the original FBI timing, that is 11:25, but not with the Dallas police time of 11:20. And the official story needs 11:20 because that means Jack Ruby wasn't with the camera. And of course, that means Jack Ruby was with the camera. And this is a few minutes later in the broadcast. Note the time clock says 11:29, but listen to what Bill Lord says, and listen to how he says it.
Got him on the stretcher. It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
Bill Lord says it's 5 minutes earlier than what the time clock says, meaning that the shooting would have taken place 5 minutes earlier, meaning that the Dallas police time would be right, and that the time clock time would be wrong, and the first FBI time would be wrong. And notice the way he says it. To me, it sounds like he's lying. It just sounds like and why would he even be giving the time right now? 5 minutes after the shooting. And it sounds like he's lying, the last part of what he says there. See if you agree.
It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
Yeah, Bill, sure it is. I think that Bill Lord was told by somebody managing the situation in real time to say that it was 5 minutes earlier than it really was, because they already knew that they wanted the shooting time to be 11:20, not 11:25.
It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
And what's going on with Rob Walker? I think it's the same thing that's going on with Bill Lord.
Given was 10 o'clock this morning. The actual transfer took place an hour and 20 minutes later.
I think Rob Walker has been told to say that the time of the shooting had been 11:20. Look at his body language. He looks at his watch to tell us when the transfer took place, and it had been half an hour before this. Why would he be looking at his watch? And right when he says it, his eyes shoot off to his right, and I think that's an indication of deception. That is, I think Rob Walker here has been told to give some timing information that would indicate that the shooting took place at 11:20.
Given was 10 o'clock this morning. The actual transfer took place an hour and 20 minutes later.
And then 3 minutes later, he does it again. He looks at his watch when there's no reason for him to look at his watch. He's talking about something that happened a half an hour before, and yet somehow looking at his watch. I mean, it's just his way of saying he's checking the time without really checking his watch. He's been told to say what time, and here he actually states the time of the shooting as being 11:20.
But they decided to move him. They made a public announcement that he would be moved at 10 o'clock this morning. It occurred at 11:20 this morning, about an hour and 20 minutes late.
Yeah, Rob, sure it did. So this was a conspiracy that had control over the media in real time. I'm not saying they had control over every person in every media organization, but they had the ability to get things done. They had the ability to make Bill Lord say it was 5 minutes earlier than it really was.
It's now 11:24 here in Dallas.
And they had the ability to get Rob Walker to say that the shooting had occurred at 11:20 when he knows damn well it occurred at 11:25.
They made a public announcement that he would be moved at 10 o'clock this morning. It occurred at 11:20.
So the first word we have from the FBI is that the shooting occurred at 11:25, and the first word we have from WFAA is that the shooting occurred at 11:25. So I think the shooting occurred at 11:25, and that the subsequent information is an attempt to cover up that fact. And 11:25 gives Jack Ruby enough time to be with that camera. Now, there is evidence for the time of the shooting involved with the calling of the ambulance to come get Oswald. Naturally, the ambulance, you would expect, would be called very shortly after Oswald had been shot. And this is a radio call sheet from the Dallas Police Department. And the time of the call for the ambulance here is the point here. Mr. Hubert of the Warren Commission, as you can see in the Warren Commission excerpt below, says, "This writing in blue ink that I referred to is not your own handwriting?" And Mrs. Kaysen says, "No, sir, it is not." Now, Mrs. Kaysen is the person who made out the slip. And it's kind of convoluted into testimony, so I'll just explain it. What the Warren Commission is showing her is a photocopy of an original. They don't have the original here. Somebody has written on the photocopy this time information. And according to Mrs. Kaysen, the original had a stamped time on it. And she thinks probably the stamped time didn't copy well, and so somebody wrote it in by hand. But what this means is the time we're looking at here is not necessarily the same time stamped at the time that the ambulance was called. That is, Mrs. Kaysen put this into a time clock, and the time clock would automatically stamp the time on it. We don't have that information. We have this photocopy which somebody, unknown to Mrs. Kaysen, has written in the time. And the very point of this is to know what the time was, to be able to prove it. And this doesn't prove anything about the time, because this is just a time that somebody else wrote in. And of course, it supports the official story time, coincidentally. And Mrs. Kaysen said that she called ambulance, or that the ambulance that was being sent by the ambulance service was ambulance 607, but 605 is written on the slip because, according to her, apparently the dispatcher already knew about the shooting and had already called ambulance 605. So that explains that, I guess. So the ambulance that she called for didn't even come, but the point is the time at which she called it. And here it says the time is 11:21, even though that's not the time that was originally stamped. Now, on the Dallas Police radio transcripts, the first time we hear anything about ambulance 607, which is the ambulance that had been called to respond for Oswald, it's 11:24, which, if these time clocks would all be synchronized, would be 3 minutes after the ambulance had been called for, which seems a bit long. And it's called by the dispatcher, and you can't tell how long afterwards it is he answers, but it's after the 11:24 time announcement, where I have circled where ambulance 607 actually answers and says that he's en route. And so it seems a little funny. It seems like it's 3 minutes out from when the ambulance was called, when this should just be seconds afterwards, I think. So the implication to me is that this 11:21 time that has been handwritten onto the photocopy of the call slip is probably earlier than the real time was. And looking at the radio traffic here at the time that the two ambulances appear, that is 607 and 605, and the other radio traffic that goes on, what it looks like to me, even though it's very confusing, what it looks like to me is that dispatchers already know before Oswald is shot that he's going to be shot and that the time is going to be 11:20. I think they know in advance, and they're trying to make the radio traffic look consistent with that shooting time, even though it's not explicit that Oswald had been shot at that time. It'll be a lot of nuanced analysis, and I'm not going to go through all that in this video, but it's there if you want to do it on your own. Various police officers gave varying times for the time of the shooting of Oswald, anywhere from 11:20 to 11:30. I think some were even outside that range. But these four here did give the 11:25 time. So I think they should be mentioned. All things considered here, I think it's clear that Ruby would have had enough time to be with that camera. And therefore, I think Ruby was with that camera. And that's how he got into the basement. And it's all part of the conspiracy that he get into the basement. And presumably, Ruby did actually shoot Oswald, but I'm not absolutely sure of that. And I say that because in this film, you can see this man, I'm calling the bag man, apparently put a bag over Ruby's head. And apparently Ruby is cooperating by putting his head there in such a way that this man can easily put a bag over his head. And I don't know why this would happen if this was really Ruby. There's so many people, though, identified it as Ruby that it's hard to believe that it wasn't Ruby. But it's possible, I think, that somebody else was brought into the basement who looked something like Ruby, had a hairline like Ruby, and maybe it was some kind of professional killer to make sure that the bullet did the job. But it could be that Ruby perhaps was told that somebody else would be blamed, and therefore they wanted to cover his face so people wouldn't know it was Ruby. I don't know. It seems to me most likely that actually Ruby himself did shoot Oswald. But I find this video to be annoying in that it seems to suggest that something's being done here, and I just don't understand why it would be done if that really is Ruby. So I have to leave this as an unknown in my own mind. I don't know if that really is Ruby that shot Oswald. It could be they had somebody else come out and shoot Oswald and then made the switch in the back room. And Ruby willingly took on the role, probably being promised that he wouldn't be convicted and executed. And of course, as we know, he was convicted, but that was overturned. And we are told that he died of natural causes in the hospital. Anyway, I think that Oswald's shooter came in with the television camera, and that our masters covered that up so we would believe that Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK and Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, and these are just two random crazy people who do crazy things, and there's nothing to worry about. Your rulers are wonderful.